And at the end of the process of filling out those forms, you'll be able to schedule your vaccination in terms of the venue, the date, and the exact time that you would prefer to have your vaccines. This is, of course, to avoid a situation where people will be crowded at our vaccination centers. There are many Nigerians who will not be able to do this self-registration by themselves. So we have the A, which is for assisted registration. We have identified people at the local government level that will help Nigerians do that registration. Then the C is for concomitant registration and vaccination. For anybody who is not able to do this e-registration by themselves, or they do not have the opportunity of anybody assisting them with the registration, they'll be able to come to the site of the vaccination on the day of vaccination. That is to say, there will be allowances for a walk-in. You just walk in at a time that is convenient for you. You'll be registered and you'll be vaccinated as well. Then we're going to be looking at the dot maps that will show us where Nigerians have been able to e-register themselves. Where we find a gap, then we will deploy teams to go and help Nigerians do that registration, so that when they come to the health facilities, we'll not be having chaos and crowdiness of the health facility. So that is what the TEACH strategy is about. Even as I speak, trainings are already going on in the local government areas, so that people are not only familiar with the programmatic aspect of giving a shot, but also how this will be documented. With the electronic registration, the vaccinees will be given a card with a seal that has a QR code. Once that QR code is scanned, it will pull up the electronic data. So for people who will be traveling, it will provide an opportunity to validate that you've taken a specific vaccine when you took the vaccine. And of course, the most basic biodata that links that information with your card. In terms of the next steps, in the vaccination program, given that we've now received the vaccines, is a launch that will be taking place at the National Hospital tomorrow. The time scheduled for that launch is 10 a.m. The launch will be conducted by the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. So the plan is to vaccinate the frontline health workers that work in the treatment center of the National Hospital. Those will be the first people, just like we've communicated, that frontline health workers will be the first people to get the vaccine. After that, the plan is to vaccinate Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, and strategic leaders on Saturday. Again, we're hopeful that when Nigerians see leaders like Mr. President and the Vice President take this vaccine, it will increase their confidence around the safety of the vaccines. As you're well aware, even before the vaccines arrived in Nigeria, there was a lot of hesitancy, but the hesitancy is not localized to Nigeria. It is a global phenomenon, and the ways to overcome vaccine hesitancy is similar no matter where you are. We have to provide the right information to those people who have questions. We cannot dismiss their cynicism. We cannot assume that they do not know. It is our responsibility as health workers, as public health workers, not to only offer the vaccine, but do the extra work in terms of providing the resources that are needed to convince people that these vaccines are safe, just like my sister, the DG of NACI, has enumerated all of the processes that went into making sure that these vaccines are validated to be safe and effective. Sharing this information with Nigeria, that is the work that all of us have to do, and that is work that we're trying to do. And we have seen in the last few weeks how from up to 75% of Nigerians indicating that they will not be taking this vaccine, to just about 25% who are saying they will definitely not take this vaccine. We have about 50% that say yes, they will, and 25% that are not so sure. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we know that we have the resources and the commitment to get this job done. So after we're able to get our strategic leaders to publicly demonstrate that these vaccines are safe, The plan is to now go to the state level to start the launch from the treatment centers of the state's levels, and then also get strategic leaders such as governors to publicly take the vaccines. By the time all of this happens, we will have finished all of the necessary preparations. We have created a dashboard that will track very carefully the status of preparedness of the states. We will not be sending vaccines to the states that have not fulfilled all of the criteria that will ensure that if the vaccines get to the states, that they are going to be safe. So, for example, we have communicated to the states that they have to ramp up their security around their cold stores, because these are very valuable vaccines, and we do not want a situation where the vaccines are taken to the state and criminal elements take advantage to vandalize these cold stores. We're also aware that during the EndSARS vandalization, that there were some cold stores that actually suffered. I know that the state governors are trying to fix those, but we have to verify that those are ready to receive our vaccines. We're working with the sub-national level. We're in conversations with the Nigeria Governors Forum to see how all of this will work together so that Nigerians can rapidly get their vaccines. It is very, very critical that we roll out rapidly so that we can cut into any types of mutations that will potentially lead to the development of resistance against our vaccines. So by the time all of this is done, we're hopeful that we will roll out to all of the other frontline health workers that are in the field by the 12th of March. Again, most of the states will probably have 1 or 2 days, couple of days difference, depending on their preparedness to receive the vaccine. It is important that we're successful in the rollout of this vaccine. Now, in terms of our prioritization, which is the last part of my update, we have communicated in the past, and bear me when I repeat that the first phase of our rollout of this vaccination is going to focus on the frontline health workers. But these are the people that are in closest proximity to people that have COVID-19. So they are the ones that we have to give the vaccines to. They are the ones that have sacrificed in the last 1 year, putting their lives and the lives of their families at risk. So they are going to be the first line of people that will provide these vaccines to. Then we will consider other health workers, and then other first responders, our security outfit, and then, for the purpose of demonstrating the safety of these vaccines, the strategic leaders. The second phase will be around identifying those people who are, again, very vulnerable to the COVID-19 virus. The elderly people are more likely to have severe disease and die from these vaccines. So we're going to be identifying them and also giving them the vaccine in the second phase. Part of what the e-registration does is to get information about the age of the individual who's filling out the form. It also has information around the presence of underlying disease. So the third group of individuals that we're going to be giving these vaccines to are those that have underlying disease. Again, they are likely to suffer worse if they contract COVID-19. So the electronic database helps us sort of segment all of these populations. Then the last group will be those who do not have any of these conditions, or any condition that predisposes them to have worse fate if they were to contract the disease. We do know that we're going to be vaccinating only people that are 18 and above. But clearly, one thing that all of these processes that has brought us here today has shown us is that the Presidential Task Force and everybody who is involved in the COVID-19 response has clearly seen all of the trouble that we have gone through to make sure that we select only vaccines that have received WHO emergency use listing and have been validated by NAFDAC. I know there are so many countries that started vaccinating before Nigeria, but if you are to inquire, you will find that a lot of them did not wait for WHO emergency use listing. Some of them did not wait for some of the stringent regulatory agencies to certify these vaccines before they started using them. That is not what we're going to do in Nigeria. That is not what we have done. We've gone through a rigorous process, and we're pretty comfortable that the vaccines that we're going to be rolling out in the next couple of days are going to be safe and effective against the virus. Now we can confidently say, with all of the non-pharmaceutical interventions that will continue, we have now taken that first and determined step towards turning the corner when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
We have been hearing of vaccine mutation of variants here and there, the South African variant, the UK variant, Brazil variant, Japan variant, and the possible effect on vaccines. So I will invite the NCDC to come and speak on that and on any other thing that is of interest from his point of view. Dr. Chikwe.
Honorable Minister, dear colleagues, gentlemen of the press, I'll keep my comments very brief. Firstly, today is exactly 1 year and 5 days since we identified our first case in Nigeria. If you remember the predictions last year, around this time, of a doomsday scenario in Nigeria, and you look at the numbers this morning, yes, unfortunately, just under 2,000 people have died from COVID, and we've had over 150,000 cases. The seroprevalence survey we did just indicated there might be a few more than that. But I think altogether, you will agree that with the leadership of Mr. President, Nigeria has actually mounted a very robust response to this outbreak. And you know, when things go wrong in our country, we often blame government. And when they go right, we thank God. But I think in this case, God may have walked a little bit through the leadership of our country to establish the mechanisms that have directed the robust response we've had so far. The Honorable Minister and my colleagues have already eloquently given a breakdown of all the aspects. So I'll just focus on two things. For us at NCDC, our response continues as much as vaccines provide some light, very important light, but the response has to continue. We have to continue our surveillance. We have to continue our testing. We have to continue protecting our healthcare workers with the personal protective equipment that we're doing. We have to sustain the critical investments that we've put into our health security infrastructure for the first time in decades. We cannot let this go because we have to continue this work. So that's the work we will have to continue doing, supporting our colleagues at NPHCDA who will now be leading the response, but also continuing to drive risk communication, educating Nigerians on the benefits that vaccines will provide to them, but what they need to continue doing throughout this response. And of course, we've all heard about the risks of emerging variants of the virus. As viruses are transmitted from one person to the other, there's a risk of new variants emerging. But the fact that there's a new variant in itself is not a problem. The challenge is when that variant has an impact on the efficacy of vaccines, i.e. how well vaccines offer the protection that has been predicted. And that's what we have to now study very carefully in our context, and we're making plans to do so as we roll out this service. There'll be many new variants. I won't bore you with all the details, but the key thing is to understand that the fact that Brazil was able to identify that there was a variant that led to reduced effectiveness of the vaccine wasn't by chance. It's because they looked. They looked by having the studies in place and executed in order to find that impact. And that's exactly what we're planning to do over the next few weeks here. I'll end by appealing to Nigerians. It's been a tough year for all of us as we have given up so much of what makes us who we are. We have limited our celebrations, limited our opportunities to eat together, to dance together, to pray together, to be the people that we are. But we need to hold on for a little while longer so that we can consolidate the gains that we've had over the last year and make sure that we come out of this in a good place. The Honorable Minister has highlighted the difficult challenges many countries that are not too dissimilar from us, in Brazil, for instance, are going through. So at the beginning of this outbreak last year, you remember all the allusions to the weather, the heat, the tropics. They're not dissimilar from Brazil. They're going through a very difficult period at the moment. So it might be that there's an alternative explanation. It might be that we have actually delivered a fairly strong response in Nigeria. And so I'll end by saying that this is actually a moment for health security. In 2004-05, after the SARS outbreak, China started the establishment of the China CDC. It is now an institution of 5,000 people working every day very hard to protect those people. After the 2014-15 Ebola outbreak here in West Africa, we saw the establishment of the Africa CDC. And if there's any highlight of the response on the continent, it's been the collaborative effort of all African countries. The Honorable Minister just mentioned the efforts being led on by ACDC in enabling access to Africans for vaccines. Unlike many other continents, all the other continents, Africa has actually worked together. You haven't heard about nationalism in Africa as a theme. That's because of the robust response by the Africa CDC. This is a moment for Nigeria. And with the efforts of Mr. President, the Presidential Task Force, and of course the commitment of the Honorable Minister, we will build on what has happened in the last year and make sure that not only do we complete this response, but we also leave our country stronger and better prepared for the future. Thank you.
So I thank the directors for their presentations. I will just round up some of these. We'll preempt the questions that may be asked. First is that as a country, we have been quite lucky so far, but we must not press our luck. We must continue to do the needful with non-pharmaceutical interventions, the public health measures, which we must continue strictly. Comply with isolation regulations. And isolation is when you have been diagnosed as positive, but you are not very sick, you do home-based care. Be faithful to it. Quarantine is when you are not yet sure of your status. And let me say at this point that the symptoms generally will appear within 3 to 7 days for treatment. Do not continue to wait. The earlier you report, the easier it is to do the treatment. The next thing is to look at vaccine as a game changer. It's critical addition to our strategy. But let us not make the mistake of thinking that it is a replacement for everything else. It is not. It is an addition to the strategy. It's extremely important to bear that in mind, please. Vaccine. Because of fake vaccines running around, it's been mentioned in very many countries, we are buying vaccines only from known sources. The COVAX, the AVAT of the African Union, and the bilateral agreements that we have with countries directly. We are not buying from private sources or importers where we do not know the background of where the vaccine is coming from. It's too risky. The administration of vaccines is by now, for now, the sole remit of National Primary Healthcare Development Agency until a point where they begin to fan out to additional administrators. And let us say that the NPHCD has a lot of experience. They are very well prepared. They have institutional memory, and they have the capacity, and they can even administer these vaccines to close groups and close settings. If, for example, you want that in a particular area, you can make an application to them for that. So the administration is for MPACDA. Now, the question will arise, what about domestic vaccine, Nigerian-made vaccines? Yes, there are Nigerian researchers who are also in the vaccine space. We have at least 2 vaccine candidates in Nigeria, but they need a lot of resources to go through the clinical trial phases. The trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So we're trying to look for the resources to support them in doing that. And until that is done, which will take at least a year, we are not yet directly going to be in that game. We have a vaccine production company called BioVaccines Nigeria Limited, owned 49% by the federal government, which is looking to partner with other vaccine producers and perhaps produce under license here if the technology transfer agreement or discussions go through. So we have the possibility of also not only using indigenously produced vaccines, but also vaccines that are come here as a result of technology transfer. Now, there are also questions of post-COVID syndrome. People have had COVID and then they are sick or continue to show symptoms. That's a subject that's not yet understood. It's still being studied. Nobody knows the full answer yet to it. But as soon as, when we know more about it, we can talk about the residual symptoms that they suffer. I also wish here to acknowledge West African Health Organization, with whom we are working. It is very important for us that our neighbors, because there's no use if we are fully vaccinated, we get herd immunity, and our neighbors are not. And we have open borders where they come in and go out. So we work in the West African Health Organization to ensure that in our region, in fact, in the African region, no country is left behind, even because they have no money or they have no money, they are not able to pay immediately. We support that initiative. The government of Nigeria supports the whole of Africa approach so that, as the DG of WHO has said, no one is safe until all of us are safe. And finally, the lessons that we shall learn from post-COVID, we shall use these lessons to review the impact on our population health. We shall use it to consolidate our health system, to rebuild and especially reorganize our public health response and public health security, and review the changes that we need to make in our health system so that we can respond even better in future. Thank you very much. I will now open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister and his team. Please, we intend to be out of here latest 11:30 because there's a presidential event after that. So, the questions, please.
No microphone for you.
Is there no roving microphone?
You didn't hear my lecture just now about putting down masks. Okay, thank you.
Nigeria has bilateral agreement with China. So I want to find out if there will be any future cooperation between China and Nigeria for further provision of vaccines and other medical devices.
Okay, good morning, sirs. I would like to stand on the already established protocol. So I just have two questions. One for the DG of NAVDAC and the second for the DG of the MPHCDA. The vaccines arrived on Tuesday, and by now, a lot of Nigerians are expecting that we should have information as to what stage we are now, whether or not tomorrow that the vaccines will be rolled out is sacrosanct. From Tuesday that these vaccines arrived, I know that NAVDAC has commenced work already. I want you to be a bit categorical because some of the terms you use, some Nigerians might perhaps not understand the way you have explained. I want you to, what level are we now? Since the vaccines arrived, what level are we now? Is tomorrow still sacrosanct for the rollout of the vaccines? Thank you. Then the DG, the Executive Director of MPHCDA. My second question is going to toe the line of my colleague. I think the awareness is a bit poor, I mean to say. I stand to be corrected when it comes to the issue of this vaccine before they even arrived. On social media, you see people saying, if you take this vaccine, you'll be crippled. If you take this vaccine, you might not be able to give birth any longer. I think the MPHCDA has a lot of jobs to do in this regards by letting Nigerians know that these vaccines are safe. And I think that this boils down to the issue of raising the level of awareness as we speak. Thank you very much.
Questions are taken in 3-3. And the questions to me are about the transparency on allocation. If you listen carefully, you remember that I said that no one is safe until all of us are safe. It's no use, say, Edo State, for example, taking vaccines, and then the neighboring states don't have. Because there's movement all through, which will make the whatever thing you got in Edo useless unless all your neighbors are also on the same wave with you. So therefore, it is the interest of all of us, each of us, of all states, to make sure that their neighboring states do have, including Kogi State, that they will get vaccines. And including the interest of the MPHCDA, they have a routine system. As I've said before, they are very well practiced in administering vaccines, the polio vaccine, the routine immunization, even the scale-up that they did. They have a well played out team and they can get to all the areas. Only the training they require is just to adapt the vaccination, which normally they give to children, to now adapt it to adults. That's about the training they need and so on. But they have a well planned, and they're going to ensure it is in the interest of all of us that the whole country is vaccinated. And there's no any state that think they can get their own vaccination, their own allocation, and the others they didn't get. They're defeating the purpose. They're shooting themselves in the foot. So therefore, even and clear allocation to all states is the not only just the objective, it is the target and it is a sensible thing to do. Now the question of bilateral, the bilateral had to do only with vaccines. Nigeria has bilateral agreement with all various countries on different things. But there are some countries who came to us and say, let's talk about vaccines. And those are India, Russia, Cuba, who said, we have vaccines, if you are interested, let's discuss. So that's where we have bilateral discussions regarding vaccines. It doesn't apply to trade or any other thing. So those are only the bilaterals I was referring to. Thank you. MPHCDA.
Sure. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I want to state categorically that we have not deployed vaccines to Edo State. So that is information that is possibly very incorrect. No vaccines have been deployed to Edo State from the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. Now, in terms of whether we have enough enlightenment continues from the grassroots all the way to the center. But we can never have enough enlightenment until we all see it as our responsibility. So you say and ask whether NPHCDA is doing enough. NPHCDA might be the lead agency, but this is a work for all Nigerians. So for example, when you went online and you saw people saying, when you take the vaccine, you will never have babies or you get crippled. What was your role? Did you counter it? Because what usually happens is that those that have negative sentiments are the ones that are more vocal. Those people who want to take the vaccine do not offer that information until you ask them. So maybe those people who are going to be taking the vaccines should be saying a whole lot more. And we're encouraging them, engaging with social media influencers. The data that I talked about earlier is around, up to how we've seen a gradual improvement in the trend of people, even on social media, who are talking positively about the vaccine. As a result of the enlightenment that we've been providing, of the case of one of our political leaders who around December shared a viral video saying that government should not accept the COVID-19 vaccines because they are bad. But shortly after, as a result of engagement, enlightenment, he brought out another video that now stated clearly that, okay, we can bring the vaccines, but NAFDAC must approve. So it is a shift in perspective as a result of engagement. We need to do a whole lot more, and I mentioned it earlier, that it is work that needs to keep ongoing until the last person gets it. It is not just enough to talk about the vaccines being safe. We also have to ramp up in terms of that interpersonal communication, right? We have to engage with the grassroots, make sure that the traditional leaders, the religious leaders are saying a whole lot more about how safe these vaccines are. So I will call on the media to continue the work of engaging, providing the right information, and steering away from controversial matters that might just confuse the general public even more. So the second question was around why you're not including journalists as frontline. Journalists are frontline workers, of course, but like they say, all men are equal, but some are more equal than others. Even among those people who are frontline, there are some that are more frontline than others. So the kind of exposure that a frontline health worker will have to a patient with COVID-19, like somebody that has COVID-19, is coughing, is talking, it's COVID-19 that they are spewing, is by no means comparable to what the journalist is facing, right? So while we will prioritize our health workers, we also know that journalists are in the front line and we'll be making provision for them, in the ranking of exposure to the virus. So in terms of how we've categorized the prioritization, it is really in relation to how exposed you are. So for example, those that work in the banking industries, the tellers that come in contact with a number of individuals that might be carrying the virus, those are people that also will be prioritized. But I do believe that with the kinds of arrangements that the Presidential Task Force and the Federal Ministry of Health has embarked on to get more vaccines, that as more vaccines come, that people will get the vaccines eventually. So we're very mindful of what roles the journalists play, and we'll be prioritizing the frontline journalists as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Minister talked about bilateral agreements that don't include vaccines generally. In terms of China or any other country, NAFDAC has no sentiment in terms of approval of vaccines. Our approval will be based on science, based purely on science, and also the fact that it is going to protect lives of our people. I just wanted to mention that. What is NAFDAC doing? Since the vaccine arrived, we were on the tarmac with the Presidential Task Force to welcome the vaccines. And after that, I actually followed my staff because we have the ports inspection staff. We had the laboratory staff that came from Lagos, the vaccines biologics lab staff that came to take samples. But I followed them to the cold stop of MPHCDA near the airport. And I saw the setting. I was very pleased with the cold source setting of MPHCDA. They showed me where the vaccines will be. I mentioned track and trace. There were 211 pallets, 221 pallets with 7,800 and something boxes. For track and trace, it is a barcoding system. We expected what is called the aggregation data that will go on each pallet that says, okay, there are 2,000 boxes in each pallet, in this pallet from batch 1 or batch 2. We didn't get that data, but we got what is called the master data. So we had to scan, our staff had to scan with the MPHCDA because they trained, our staff came to train MPHCDA earlier in the day. They have to scan all the boxes individually for about 6 hours that day. They couldn't finish. They came back yesterday morning and finished scanning. But the lab staff took samples to Lagos, of course, in the cold box and so on. And as we speak, they are working around the clock to test the vaccines without us saying it is okay. It cannot even be launched tomorrow. So I've been working with Dr. Faisal to ensure that by the end of the day or very early in the morning, we will say, yes, it is okay. And also we are training. I've told you about Med Safety app. Our own staff are getting ready. We are training other staff in terms of pharmacovigilance. Because once the individual gets the vaccine, our work starts in terms of pharmacovigilance. Asking what is going on, things like that, and making sure that it is recorded. Because we join the global world by also contributing our own data, that this is what we have in Africa or in Nigeria. So that is what we are doing. In terms of general safety, there is no drug, no medication or medicine that doesn't have side effects. But because this is such a new vaccine, we are paying more attention to it. Is it just ordinary side effect, my arm is sore and so on? Or it is that I feel so weak for 2 days or 3 days, So we're going to note all those. And those will be compared. In fact, part of what we're doing at the African continental level is to also compare data from Nigeria, as an example, with data from South Africa. What are the ethnic differences? That is what this gathering of data will do. And then as an African continent, what are the differences between our own and the European? What are the differences between our own and Japan? Because everybody is doing exactly what we are doing. And we have been comparing data, despite the fact we didn't get our own vaccine quickly. But I've been in meetings looking at data from FDA, from UK, from Singapore, from Japan. We have a big platform of regulators where we share the experiences. Thank you very much.
Much for Reuters. I have 2 questions. Honorable Musa, I would like to know if the government will be involving the private sector companies in the distribution of these vaccines nationwide. Then secondly, I would like to know how long the first phase and second phase of the vaccination is going to last, and when exactly is going to get to the turn of those who are not ill. Those adults that are not ill, there's nothing wrong with them, but they actually need the vaccine. And then finally, You mentioned that Mr. President will be vaccinated on Saturday. We would like to know if we'd like to know the time, and we know that probably is the probably certainly is going to be Villa and any other thing. Thank you.
Thank you. At the moment, sir, it will look as if we are relying on charity for the supply of vaccines instead of doing our own procurement. I'm just wondering if there's a problem with this supply. Is there any contingency arrangement from your part? And the second question is for the CDC director. So you have told us that there are some, you are studying to know whether we have some COVID variants that may lessen the efficacy of the vaccines we have. And the rollout is coming up shortly. Does this not amount to putting the cart before the horse? Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. Gloria Mezuki from Channels. I'm sorry. My question is to the Minister of Health. Are there still plans to produce vaccines domestically to tackle COVID-19? Okay, Gloria Mezuki from Channels TV. I mentioned, are there still plans to produce vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines in the country?
Morning, sirs. My name is Juliana Taiwo of the Sun newspapers. I'm just interested in knowing when you people on the PTF committee will be taking your own vaccine for us.
Hello. My name is Tehim Badaka with The Guardian. My question is to the DG. She mentioned that there have been falsified COVID-19 vaccines already in the market. I want to know if arrests have already been made.
I'm going to defer to the Executive Director of MPACDA about distribution. All I can tell you is that MPACDA has been doing this for a long time in that they do routine immunization. They have a very solid, but they will answer the question in detail. Now, as for the second question regarding charity, we're not just depending on charity. Right from the time the idea of vaccine production came up, the World Health Organization, Gavi, as you all know, Gavi is the Global Alliance of Vaccines and Immunization, who have been normally supporting Nigeria in financing routine vaccines. They are specialists in vaccines, which are procured by UNICEF for us, came together with World Health Organization and an organization called CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, to say, look, let us, this is a vaccine that's new. We don't know the cost. We don't know the financial situation of certain countries. Let's set up an organization to get vaccines, and in fact, not only vaccines at the time, it was diagnostics kits and so on, to certain countries that may not have easy access, to get what you call equitable access, because those countries that are rich and powerful, and especially those countries where the vaccines are manufactured, will give themselves priority. So therefore, if we can gather resources and make substantial bulk orders, in fact, not only that, if we support certain vaccine developers to complete their trials by paying for some of their trials, we can have priority to get the vaccines first and give to the countries that we normally support. Gavi has been supporting us normally and supporting many countries normally. So this is just an extension of the support that they normally give. And that support they limited to 20% of population. So that support is to 92 countries, low and lower middle income countries. There are 98 other countries that belong to this facility, which are self-financing countries. They have the money to pay. They even pay more than actually they need, but they have small orders, and small orders may not necessarily make an impact on the producer. So they join this facility with a relatively small population. They can pay. So they add donation and pay for themselves instead of asking for a small order. So you have a bulk order. So that's where it comes from, that you have this number, about 190 countries that work together. But for us, it is the 92 who receive this special support. Now, we are looking to immunize 70% in order to have what is known as herd immunity. And the African Union, the African Center for Disease Control, recognized that immediately and went to the president of the African Union and said, look, we must set up something to support ourselves as a country, because if every country goes to order, Gambia goes there and says, I want so and so. Guinea-Bissau says, I want this. You have a lot of confusion. Many of them, they may not listen to you because your order is too small. So therefore, if we all come together as an African country, we can make order. So 52 countries in Africa came together. Equatorial Guinea, Seychelles, and Gabon said, don't worry, we can make our own arrangements. So out of the 55, 52 came together and joined in the AVAT, Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, to make a bulk order. And the first bulk order they made was for 270 million doses, which immediately will impress any manufacturer. So the manufacturers are impressed and they are ready to produce that vaccine with as much as a priority as possible. Now, in order that we are not looking for money here and there, the African Afrexim Bank said we shall bankroll it and then you pay us back so that you are not scrambling looking for money. But those who have money immediately can pay. If you don't have immediately, you can pay over 5-7 years. So that's a continental agreement. And the purpose of it is that you also want your neighbors to be free. If we are fully well vaccinated, Benin Republic, Togo, Niger are not, we are still not quite safe because there is free movement among all these countries. So it's in our interest to also see that all these countries are on the same page. And that's why the West African Health Organization is also pursuing the same initiative as the African Union. And for that, we have opened an account with Afrexim Bank. The headquarters of Afrexim Bank is in Cairo. And the account signatories are from both the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance. And at this point, any organization that wants to support can pay into that account. And we have already spoken with the private sector that if you want to support us, if you even if you're looking for vaccines, instead of you going to go and purchase your own from sources that are not very clear, it can be guaranteed through this account. The 270 million doses we had before has been increased last week by another 300,000 at 300 million. So we have 570 million doses potentially on that account of AVAT. And that's very good. And it will probably grow even beyond that. And they're offering 4 types of vaccines. They're offering Sputnik, they're offering Johnson & Johnson, they're offering AstraZeneca, they're offering Pfizer, BioNTech. So you can even choose which one you want, what quantity you want. But normally they will allocate according to population. Measure it, what's your population, this is yours. They had, in fact, originally allocated 41 million doses to us. But with the new addition of 300 million, it can be up to 80, 85 million doses. And you can select the mix that you want, and then you start paying into that account. So we are going to pay into that account. So we're not depending on charity. We are depending on an arrangement that is existing for low and lower medium income countries and our own procurement capacity to fill up to the level we want. And we are encouraging other African countries to also aim for 60 to 70% vaccination and herd immunity. Then the capacity to produce local vaccine, yes, we have a company that the federal government co-owns, which is just setting up. Even before this COVID-19, they were just setting up, and they were preparing, in fact, to start producing the routine vaccines that we have been using. We are using routine vaccines already, which they negotiated with NPHCDA, which actually uses the vaccines, to have about 15% of NPHCDA's needs and supply them. So now, the entire lockdown has delayed their plans of really fully setting up because many engineers could not come in to complete their completion of the plant. But we are talking with certain countries to see if they can transfer technology here to support local manufacturing. And that is the only arrangement we have now for technology transfer. One country has said, well, we're ready to talk about it. We can't guarantee you, but we'll talk about it. And we have even discussed the possibility of going to visit them and talk to them to support local manufacture of using foreign technology, technology import. I also talked about the indigenous vaccines, which they still have to go through the trials before you can talk of manufacture. Those ones are not ready for manufacture yet. I think that answers the question.
In the interest of time, I'm going to be brief. So the first question from Reuters was the length of the phases. The length of the phases is going to be dependent on vaccine availability. We expect that between the first and the second doses, there will be 12 weeks as recommended by WHO to make sure that we get the best immune response to the AstraZeneca vaccine. Like the Honorable Minister mentioned, apart from the COVAX facility where we got this current consignment of AstraZeneca from, we're expecting vaccines from the African Union. So even before the first batch of vaccinees are due for their second shot, we expect that we will get additional vaccines that will, automatically go into the second phase, as it were. In terms of the timing for the vaccination of Mr. President on Saturday, that I'm sure will be communicated to you by the folks in the media section of Mr. President's staffing. But I'll assure you that after this meeting, we're having conversations around how that will look like. So there was a question about when the members of the Presidential Task Force will be taking their vaccines. So the expectation is that when Mr. President and the Vice President take their vaccines, that the chairman of the Presidential Task Force could take his vaccines on that same day. But for other members of the Presidential Task Force, we expect that as from Monday, the ministers will be taking their vaccines along with the rollout in the treatment centers, right? The vaccination that will take place on Saturday is yet to be finalized, but I will not be surprised if there are members of the Federal Executive Council who might seize the opportunity to also take their vaccines. But for us, of course, it is not a priority for Presidential Task Force members. The first and the most important people that we're prioritizing for this vaccination are the frontline health workers who have sacrificed in the last 1 year to protect other Nigerians. Thank you.
To me on the variants of concern vis-a-vis vaccination. To say for the beginning, we've had a science-led approach to this response from the very beginning. So you might also know that the first sequence of any virus out of Africa was done here in Nigeria. A collaboration between NCDC, the Nigeria Institute for Medical Research, and the Africa Center for Excellence in Genomics in Ede. Since then, we have continued sequencing our viruses. Our capacity is limited, but we've done just about 500 sequences so far. And that is important because as of today, we haven't found any of the B1351 variant, which is the variant of concern in South Africa, that has been shown to have, for which the vaccine has a reduced efficacy towards. So that's very important. We have been looking, but we haven't found this particular variant of concern in Nigeria. So that is very, we're very happy about that, but we have to keep looking. And we will keep looking, keep increasing our sequencing capacity, which is exactly what we're doing at the moment. On the second question, you can't measure if there's a loss in vaccine efficacy if you don't have the vaccines. So we are just getting in the vaccines now. So in parallel to the rollout, we will start a couple of studies to see whether there's any impact on the variants that we have here. And every country does that as they roll out the vaccine. That is why we know that the vaccine has been so impactful in countries like Israel, increasingly so in the UK. It is because of these studies they do as they roll out the vaccine. So my point is, as we roll out the vaccines, our colleagues lead on the operational aspects, on the regulatory aspects. We then lead on demonstrating the value that these vaccines will have on the transmission patterns, on the burden of infection of COVID in Nigeria. Thanks.
Falsified vaccines. I made a press briefing about 2 months ago, and at the same time, I instructed the Investigation and Enforcement Directorate to go on the road. They gave me a report 2 days ago. We've not found any, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Because the day I made the press briefing, a young friend of mine called me and said, "Thank God you made the press briefing, because my mom was going to be given the vaccine." And I immediately called her. So they may be doing this underground, but I believe that press briefing will have alerted so many, because there was no way that a company will be doing retail sale on vaccines. No way. So they were all falsified, and very likely that's why we couldn't find them. They probably just discarded them. But we are still working. Our investigation enforcement works with Interpol, because Interpol has been on this, and we work closely with them. But we have not found anything yet. Thank you.
On behalf of the Presidential Communication Team, thank those who I can call the faculty this morning. You can imagine the quantum of information that we have had. Very, 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 very useful to society. We depend on the media to disseminate this, because the country is looking forward to being educated and informed on this matter. So I would like to thank the Honorable Minister for Education and for his team, Dr. Faisal, Honorable Minister for Health, and his team, Dr. Faisal, Professor Muji Adeyeye, and Dr. Chike Ihikuezu. Thank you very much. You're well appreciated. This is a good service you have done for the nation. Since the pandemic started, you have been at it, and you continue at it. Thank you very much. You're appreciated.